Welcome to this overview of Damian Thompson's book, The Fix, which is subtitled How Addiction is Taking Over Your World. Not just the usual things we associate with the word addiction, but also our seemingly innocent daily habits. The things you can openly display without anyone commenting. But things like cupcakes can also be objects of desire that can reinforce addictive behavior. Because our brains have evolved to seek out immediate short-term rewards, and as a society, we have an increasingly insistent habit of rewarding ourselves whenever we feel the need to lift our mood, which means we are all susceptible to becoming addicted to something when the addictive item is economically, socially, and psychologically available to us. Because human beings influence and copy each other, and if we can convince ourselves it isn't really that bad, then we can justify it to ourselves. Damian suggests the things we think of as addiction and the things we usually downplay as distractions are on a spectrum, all dangerous, just some not easily recognized as such. Our addictions, therefore, can be loosely considered as a three-level pyramid, with the bottom third made up of ordinary people whose addictive impulses are difficult but not impossible to excite. Above that are vulnerable individuals whose natural reaction to stress is to search for a fix. And at the apex are what we think of as the addicts, those whose unknown cause but wide open wanting pathways make them capable of developing all-consuming obsessions. Now you may have decided, it's okay, I'm firmly in the bottom third, or okay, I'm in the second tier, but only mildly so. But how often do you check your phone when you're with others? For as a self-acknowledged addict, Damian knows firsthand where things have replaced people is a good test of whether you are ticking the addiction box. However, the big issue is our environments are not changing by accident. Organizations are designing their products to appeal to our brain's reward center, and that is driving us into relationships with things that previously we lived quite happily without. Because for most of us, our brains are addicted to its own opioids. And it is that aspect that means we need to revisit the definition of addiction, especially as our greater online presence is leading to more process-related addictions, which in the past would have required us to go somewhere like a mall to shop, or casino to gamble, or gaming arcade to beat our previous best score, but is now readily available 24/7 via any of our devices. And our very rate of return to games like Angry Birds means the makers just have to run the numbers to know what will hook us to play even longer, which raises the question whether addiction, the pursuing of something so excessively that it harms, is actually a disease. For example, addiction manifests as repeated behavior, and although there are recognized brain diseases like Huntington's that cause the limbs to jerk, those behaviors are involuntary, while many of our addictions are given simple solutions based on the premise we are acting voluntarily. Therefore, Damian posits addiction is too complex to be defined as a disease. For instance, researchers started to look closer into the part dopamine plays in addiction when it was identified that medication prescribed for Parkinson's was triggering addictions in some patients, which in turn led to the understanding that dopamine appears to be related to desire rather than pleasure, its job being to stimulate wanting even when our liking of this thing has leveled off. And even worse, dopamine is good at fastening on to cues, which presages our individual response loop once cued, which for some may be felt as a sexual frisson and others the, oh, I really shouldn't, but cycle of giving in to what we say we do not want. The bad news is the longer we are addicted to something, the more sensitive we become to these cues, even after years of abstinence, meaning the cue is enough to experience a rush of dopamine. However, on the upside, our responses are often situational. So when the cue is absent, we can bypass the behavior. However, pairings of activities can create new situations that tip us from one level of addiction to another. By way of illustration, our use of social media can be exacerbated when a workplace utilizes various sites, as most sites are now designed to keep us on them for as long as possible. That being the case, the issue we need to be aware of is that when we start to pair our addiction with another activity, that pairing itself can be addictive. Such as the example Damian gives of a man who paired his drug addiction with game playing, which led him to taking even more of his chosen drug, as that drug allowed him to spend more and more time gaming. The problem is the dopamine cue addiction is not curable. It tends to just be moved to something new. Accordingly, the best we can work on is changing our personal, economical, social, and psychological equation so we can move back down the pyramid. While being aware, every day there are new opportunities to move from the lowest level of the pyramid to searching for a temporary fix with no idea whether that fix will trigger another addiction for us. Very likely, all the while reassuring ourselves that binge watching or doom scrolling is just for this moment to give us the quick break we need to keep going, or that we're cool because we are part of what others are doing. So maybe the solution is we need to rediscover the vigilance that protected our hunter-gatherer ancestors so we spot the danger before it overwhelms us. This is an easy-to-read book, which I agree with the Mail on Sunday is blackly funny, intellectually serious, and compellingly readable. It is filled with explanations around why cupcakes, iPhones, and pharmacy painkillers were chosen to introduce the concept of a wider definition of addiction, as well as a detailed explanation of how Damian came to the conclusion. As a shorthand for our habit of wanting things too much, the colloquial sense of addictive is perfectly adequate. Indeed, the imprecise colloquial way we refer to addiction corresponds more closely to modern reality than supposedly scientific definitions of addiction that reduce it to biologically determined behavior produced by a non-existent disease. Damian writes this book not from a I'm perfect position because he's honest that he has an addictive streak, switching from alcohol to music, but from the perspective addiction is far too complex to be classified as a disease, and as a warning of how addiction is taking over your world, so you are aware that seemingly innocuous or smart choices may be anything but. Thank you for viewing this video. Please like and subscribe and click on the notification bell to be advised when further book overviews are uploaded. And to help me grow this channel's reach, please share the link with others.